Africa, as commonly stated, is rising. The growth of Sub-Saharan Africa's economy beginning the year 2000 is inevitable. That's at least according to the experts. Surprisingly, more than 50 years since independence, the continent is yet to fulfill some of its promises to its people. Issues to do with the war against poverty, unemployment, quality education, industrialization, and quality health coverage are some of the issues that are yet to be fulfilled. The African Union intends to refocus the continent's agenda from the struggle against apartheid to inclusive social and economic development, continental and regional integration, democratic governance, and peace and security. Continental integration, for instance, has been gaining momentum over the years. Kenya and Morocco are part of the countries that have deepened their ties over the last 2 decades. Moroccan Ambassador, who also represents Burundi and Kenya. Welcome, sir, and kindly introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, which is a unique opportunity to share my views with the lovely Kenyan people and with the readers of Business Times. And my name is Mokhtar Ghambou. I'm the ambassador of the Kingdom of Morocco to Kenya, and also to Burundi, and also a permanent representative to UN, UNEP, and UN Habitat. Before coming here, I was a member of the parliament in Morocco, and before then, I lived about 20 years of my life in the United States, where I finished my graduate studies and also was a professor at Yale University in the field of post-coloniality.
Post-coloniality, okay. In Kenya, let's shift from the United States where you served and your country where you are a member of parliament to Kenya. You've been here, I understand, about 3 years now?
Yes, this is beginning,
beginning 2016.
I just completed my 3 years
okay.
in Kenya.
What has been your experience so far in the country?
My experience, I could say that, but I always said it, and since I arrived here, and I was very happy to be in Kenya because I knew Kenya before coming here, by coincidence though. I had the honor and the chance to study with one of your greatest writers, who is Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and that's when I learned a lot about Kenya and about Africa. So I remember in dealing with my own, negotiating with your own identities as a student, graduate student in the US, and Professor Ngugi, he used to teach us one of the books, which is a canon now in Western literature and tradition, which is out of Africa. So I think we read a lot of books, but the problem is how we approach them, how we can save those elements which appeal to our identity. So when I came here, the first year, of course, that was the year of the elections, so I could not do much. Then I went back to Ngugi to read his books to familiarize myself more with the internal mechanisms of Kenya.
And during that time, how was the social economic environment of the country?
Well, the economic social environment, of course, and during the campaign, you don't focus so much on socio-economic situation than on the political discourse. But what I noticed is that Kenya is unique in the region in the sense that there is this amazing, fascinating political pluralism where the different parties at that time were competing and each has its own discourse, even if they tell you before you come here that tribes matter in all elections in Africa, but there was beyond that, there was beyond those tribal lines, there was a dynamic discourse serving the Kenyan citizens. So I had this wonderful experience of watching the elections, knowing that I was myself involved in the campaign when I was in Morocco as a member of the parliament.
You moved right from being a member of parliament into being an envoy in Kenya. This being the first job as an envoy.
Yes, absolutely. This is my first job and I'm really enjoying it because it gives me the chance to explore and discover another field which I did not think about before. And switching from academia to politics and then to diplomacy
yes.
is fascinating in itself because that gives you a global, a comprehensive picture about reality. And Kenya, knowing that I was trained as an English-speaking Moroccan, so Kenya was very suitable for me and suitable to my country, which I represent. And I've enjoyed myself. And I found a lot of things actually that remind me of Morocco. First, you have wonderful scenery. When you go to Mount Kenya, it's like you go to Mount Atlas. And this cultural diversity. And when I talk to my colleagues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here in Kenya, they always remind me that we have so many things in common, at least culturally speaking. Our streets are vibrant. Our countries are very hospitable for foreigners. We, right there, I actually managed to verify what I read about Kenya, which is a regional leader in East Africa. And I also link that to Morocco, which is a regional power in the Maghreb and North Africa. So if you come from a regional power and then you go and serve in another regional power, it makes it much easier for my job.
Okay. Now, when you came in, I believe you must have also had your focus areas, what you really wanted to impart as an envoy in the country. So what are some of the areas that you focused on when you are coming in terms of cooperation?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, unfortunately, I did not find much like a very strong, solid structure to rely on to actually drag on projects towards the future. But nonetheless, I had to start with what I'm good at first. So the first thing I started with is really looking into academic cooperation between Kenya and Morocco, knowing that Morocco offers up to 30 scholarships to Kenyan students. So I wanted to make sure that that number is not only kept but increased. So I was looking into some sort of academic exchange between Moroccan universities and Kenyan universities. True, of course, I went back to one of the basic definitions of diplomacy, which is trade, because diplomacy itself started as trade. That's why you had to make connections, you had to have representation in different countries. So we forgot that priority during the Cold War because we were focusing much more on ideologies and regimes and so forth. And now it looks to me that we're going back to it under even the form of what we say business relations between two countries. So I had to look also into the project of trade. I think that trade is very important between the two countries. There are still so many things that need to be done about that, but at least I managed to familiarize myself with the institutions dealing with trade, the Ministry of Trade, the Chamber of Commerce, National Chamber of Commerce, many other leaders in the private sector, banks, and this is why, because this is what I kept saying, both to my Moroccan colleagues and Kenyan colleagues, is that Kenya and Morocco has an amazing potential of trading, of having an strong economic relation between the two. Why? Why? Because both of them are complementary in their economies. What kills all these forums that we hear about, whether you talk about COMESA or ECOWAS or the African trade agreement that is coming, is usually, sometimes you find countries in the same neighborhood, selling or producing the same product.
Yes.
So that's a big problem.
Like most if you in East Africa, agricultural produce, yes.
Yes, if you sell coffee and tea, and I sell coffee and tea, of course, even if we're in a forum, we're going to compete.
Trade.
And that competition in the African context is a little bit like damaging sometimes. So, God bless both the two countries that were complementary in the sense that we don't grow coffee, we don't grow tea, but nonetheless, we drink coffee and tea sometimes 3 times a day.
Yes.
And we don't grow mangoes, all these fruits that we call tropical. We grow oranges, olives. So This is the difference that I value. Sometimes people are scared of the difference, but for me, I value it. And when people, but nonetheless, there are some people who need to correct these stereotypes about geography. We say sometimes when I tell people, well, let's, like when I started actually this trade agreement talks with the Kenyan leaders, some of them would say, well, the same thing in Morocco is that, oh, Kenya is far from Morocco. This is completely nonsense in a sense. Why? This is what I call imaginative geography. Why isn't London so far from Kenya? Why isn't Paris so far from Morocco? Exactly, so it's in our minds. I mean, you can imagine how the British built the empire in the 19th century without any kind of means, telecommunications and so forth. And nonetheless, they have their own plan of building a state in their own plan. This is a colonial plan, but nonetheless, you can see how the challenges are always overcome in that context. And when it comes to us Africans, after independence, we still have these kind of questions which are not really useful to us to speak about geography. Geography, distance, these are actually increase the opportunity of collaboration and cooperation between the two countries.
Now, in the area of agriculture, you just said that we are complementary as countries, one in the north and then one in the east. You don't produce coffee, but we do produce coffee. Now, which are some of the areas in terms of agriculture that we've maybe traded so far?
The first thing, we trade ideas. You know, that's very important.
Yes.
Because what is lacking in the Africa? There is no African benchmarking for African countries. Our benchmarking is usually done...
The Western world.
Exactly. This is a big problem that we have to get rid of. If you take Kenya and Morocco and they can learn from each other in fields where they are successful, that would be perfect. That would help us a lot. Why I'm saying benchmarking should be African, domesticated as an African policy, it's because it's easier and makes you more comfortable knowing our colonial history, right? To actually borrow from somebody who shared the same history like you, as if it's domestic, national. Now we use the term Pan-African, which is great, but we have to value it. Then borrow things that might not suit us culturally, or politically, or economically. So, agriculture is as important in Morocco as it is in Kenya. And areas of collaboration, we're identifying them. The crops that you grow are not automatically the same crops that we do. So we can trade in that. But we have also to share our policies. Sure. I believe that Morocco is considered now one of the top agricultural countries in Africa for many reasons that we could actually, I've explained some when I went to Mount Kenya to meet the governors, because I know that Mount Kenya is like Mount Atlas, I said, fertile land. And I was a little bit, actually I went there to discuss the question, a paradoxical one. How come that Morocco is arid or semi-arid, half of it? Nonetheless, it is one of the top, placed on the top of agricultural countries in Africa, even beyond. Why is that? So we talked about different things. The first thing is the farmer, you know? You have to place the farmer at the center of any policy of agriculture. If the farmer is not happy, you would ruin the whole process.
Sure.
Okay? We have, for example, incentives for all farmers, especially small farmers in Morocco. For example, if you have 5, 6 acres and you are about to exploit them, plow them, and then work them out, the state would give you back 80% of the expenses. And also very, very low taxation on certain products. So when you help the farmer, of course, you are already boosting agriculture. And if I may also add, of course, the dams.
That's what
it rains.
The south, how yes, are we done on the southern side of the continent?
Yeah. But the dams, of course, I was a little bit surprised when I came here and I see that people, if it does not rain 3 weeks, people started saying, oh, I might have a drought. In Morocco, if we got rain for sometimes 6 months, we completely forget about it. Our rainfall season starts sometimes like this month in November and ends in, if we're lucky, it ends in May. Sometimes it's shorter than that. But nonetheless, there is no problem about shortage of water. We have the urban population 100% supply of water, fresh water. The rural will reach now 98%, 96, 98%. And for agriculture, of course, we use the dam. Why? The dam is multi-purpose. It's about agriculture, you know, it's about fresh water. It's also about hydro electricity. So if you bring these things together, we have now 155 big dams, about 250 small dams or mediums, between small and mediums. And our plan is to build, in fact we started, we're implementing that plan. We build 3 dams every year. So you can imagine how that is important. Plus desalination, like in the Sahara, in the Moroccan Sahara. We have city of Laayoune, which is 100% depends on desalinated water. And then we have also, we moved to the sophisticated technology of investing in used water, which is the reuse of used water already, especially for supplying the urban spaces, parks, and so forth. So you can imagine it's a whole package. And then one of the other important things is the institutional, how the institution is engaged in this. We have what we call water police. So you cannot go out there and dig out a well without their permission. So, and then there is what we call also Green Morocco, the Maroc Vert, which helped us actually grow millions and millions of trees so far. We don't have, if you go to certain parts of Morocco, you don't see bare mountains anymore. You see either olive trees or almond trees, depending on the geographical area where you are. Yes.
Talking about the farmer, there is this notion that the African farmer, about 60% of the farmers are old people. The young people are working towards formal employment opportunities. Now, how is it in Morocco? Because even here in Kenya, you look at the demographics, look at the population of those who are really farming. The ones based in the rural areas are the older people. The younger people are really looking to go to the towns and the urban areas to look for jobs. How then does this work in Morocco City?
Yes, absolutely. We used to have the same thing. To the point when you say a farmer, as far as I can remember, when you have nothing to put in your ID as a job, you put farmer, which means like nobody. So, in the sense of peasant before and so forth.
Yes, peasant.
I remember. But then with the years, all of a sudden we discovered that agriculture is not a given thing. It's not something to be taken for granted. It is an industry itself. So we moved, exactly. So how to transform this meaning of agriculture as a nonsense or as a very futile, something inherited from the past, to something very modern, to a field that would really increase the growth of the country, that would participate in the economic development of the country. Yes, this is Morocco, I can tell you, without any exaggeration, turned this kind of tradition where agriculture had no particular value into a success story. Why? We modernized agriculture. We had first to start with institutions, academic institutions, scientific institutions. We had the Institute of Agronomy, where engineers were formed to test the soil, to think about adaptable agriculture. And now we have, I don't know if you heard about this term called AAA, which is one of the structures and institutions that is really working not just in Morocco, but in Africa. It's called African Adapted Agriculture for Africa. So you can see, I'm just thinking now about the continent and the farmers. I mean, in terms, you no longer have, I mean, like it became a very competitive field, and with the incentives of the state, a lot of people became farmers, understood the value of it, rediscovered the value of it, and we went into technology. We invested a lot in technology. The dams are part of it, and also what we call drop-by-drop irrigation, so to save water again. So, and then we have of course so many funds and institutions in Morocco dealing just with agriculture, right? And now Morocco is, I know it's doing the same thing in Africa, but before that, it's one of the biggest markets for the European Union. There is so much research that I'm very willing actually to exchange with them. We form students now we start forming students from Africa in our institutions dealing with agriculture. There is also the industry of food processing. You know, I see here in Kenya, agriculture, of course, now is becoming key to everything. Nonetheless, I mean, we cannot grow things and then send them abroad for processing. We need to process our products ourselves.
And then we buy them when they're expensive.
Absolutely. Yes, and you buy them expensive. Everybody can give you an example of here. And I mean, myself, I was a little surprised. I mean, Kenyan coffee is just a product that is looked for everywhere. Yes. But when you come to Kenya, sometimes you find tea. Yes, tea. So as I told you, I mean, these things we don't grow in Morocco, sure. But we know that Kenya grows them, and this is actually, again, I go back to the point. These are things that I'm thinking about. Really, I mean, when I went to Meru, I looked at factories of tea and coffee. So, but again, this is part of our economic independence in Africa. We must move, or at least stop sending our raw materials abroad. We need to create factories, entities, any kind of structure that will help us process our goods ourselves. And this is exactly in line with what His Excellency the President said in the Big Four. It's really make our things, make them here, so we can, instead of coming back from somewhere, we just need to export them ourselves. Knowing that now there is the Free Trade African Agreement, and this is where, which means that the demand is going to increase in our regions.
Now, moving from agriculture now to foreign policy. Morocco is one of the African countries, very few African countries to be precise, which have constitutional monarchs at the moment. So how would you describe your foreign policy? How does it work when it comes to bilateral trade and cooperation?
Yeah, our foreign policy, I mean, has changed. Of course, from it's becoming now like more dynamic than it used to be before, and it is creative and dynamic and also present. And these are I'm trying to quote some words from the speeches of His Majesty King Mohammed VI. And why is that? Because first, Morocco, of course, is a diplomatic reference since old times. Why we're blessed by a geography that puts us there as a bridge between Europe and Africa, right, our continent, and also bridge between South and North. So you can imagine, we have been open historically since old times. Our diplomacy can go back to 11th, 12th century, even in those primal forms. Recently, over the past 5 years, there are amazing transformations that really shape our diplomacy in a different way. The most important of which is really the new approach that we have in Morocco. And this is an approach pioneered by His Majesty, the King. And it's called South-South cooperation. It's not South-South like in the old sense of including Latin America, but this is really giving priority to Africa. South-South cooperation, guided by His Majesty's vision, means that we have to think not only about, because there is always a temptation in Morocco to look across the Mediterranean to Europe. Our imagination has been kept for historical reasons. And it's very tempting. You know, we're just about 12 miles away from Spain, from the European community. But now we're really rediscovered Africa, rediscovered it in the sense like seriously. South-South cooperation makes us like, you see its results already. You know, Morocco now is the second African investor in Africa. And in West Africa, it's the first. So you can imagine. And this is also changing the old traditions of doing business with Africa. Our companies, private or public, when they go to Senegal...
That's meaning in terms of trading within the continent?
Yes, okay. Yes, this is South-South, meaning all African countries. And private or public companies, when they go to Senegal or to Nigeria or to other places, they do not go with this mentality, or let me go and invest in minerals so I can plunder and then just take it somewhere. It's not that at all. the fields that we value now in Africa in terms of investments as social and economic projects like electricity, urbanization of the rural areas, health services, and so forth. This is like when you talk about like the material thing, when it's the concrete projects, and you can talk also about cultural things. You know, this is South-South is a comprehensive approach. It includes cultural, political, economic, and everything. So our foreign policy is also, part of it is also deals with the Moroccan migrants, and we have about 5 million people, Moroccans, living abroad. So you can imagine. But the challenge is how to keep generation after generation culturally attached to their native country. Yes. This is a very difficult stuff. I mean, in America, if you just look at history, sometimes you reach the third generation and that's it, everything melts away somewhere. And I want actually Kenya to really sort of invest in its diaspora, because ours now, they will reach fifth generation, but they are very attached to Morocco, and at all levels they contribute financially. They like you could say that actually sometimes Morocco is ranked as the second country of remittances. Yes, exactly. And they help us a lot. They also sort of sophisticate that bridge we have with Europe, so you can imagine, and we have many institutions dealing with it. This is actually part of our foreign policy, because Moroccans living abroad, right? And culturally, we established so many foundations. There is recently, about 3 years ago, we have what we call the foundation, Mohammed VI Foundation for African Ulama, African scholars. And Kenya, there is one too. And there's one in Tanzania. All the neighborhood actually is covered. Uganda, these are actually because security, terrorism is a big problem in Africa. So we try to contribute our moderate culture based on tolerance and so forth. And we try to share this experience through institutions in Africa. So, of course, this foreign policy that we adopted also gives us we signed more than 1,050 cooperation agreements with African countries, with at least 30 African partner. Yes. So this is how it's just to explain this vision of South-South cooperation, and also accompanied by a win-win approach. So we do business. This is the win-win situation. It's not like we exploit and then take that to Morocco. And we have big institutions that are also, I mean, we don't have a foreign policy that is purely foreign policy, but we have other institutions helping us, the religious institutions, academia. We give scholarships up to, how many? We give scholarships up to 11,000 African students every year. Can you imagine? And 10,000 of those have scholarships from the government, and including, of course, Kenyan students.
Now, Burundi being a younger sister country, maybe in the region, and this is a regional publication as well. What opportunities do you see in that country? I know they've had a share of their political instabilities as well. As a country, what opportunities do you look at in Burundi?
Yes, actually we are helping a lot with security, we're helping a lot with empowering the institutions, and Burundi is a beautiful country. I mean, I had the chance to be there, be appointed by His Majesty as ambassador there, and I was very delighted. It's, as you said, regional. They are, in terms of landscape, it's the same. Sometimes when we talk about graffiti, it's the same. So Burundi has been very supportive to us in all international institutions, UN, African Union, especially when it comes to the issue of our territorial integrity. So there is a great potential. There are a lot of students going to Burundi because it helps in the sense that it's less difficult for Francophone students to actually go to Morocco. We're working, of course, on English programs and trying to really adapt our education system to all African students, including those from English-speaking countries. But Burundi, our collaboration and cooperation is very strong and has been there for a long time. So,
I just take you back just to clarify. There's something you're already working on with a county here in Kenya. Meru County. I remember there was a meeting you had there some time back. What is it about, and how do we stand to benefit as a country?
Yes, because you asked me after 3 years of sort of focusing on institutions, on Nairobi, on meeting my colleagues, on UNEP, UN Habitat, I thought a diplomat should have a global or comprehensive picture of the country, not just the capital where he or she is. So I told even my colleagues, diplomats, that we need to move if you want to see more beauty and more dynamism about the country. You need to go to specific areas, especially areas that symbolize the country. So I was very happy to go to Mount Kenya, and of course knowing that Kenya derives itself from that magical mountain. And this reminds me also of the Atlas Mountains, because you know our soccer team is called the Atlas Lions. So you can see how there are many common things between us in terms that we share the symbolism of a mountain representing the country. So I was invited to actually speak about water and water policy in Kenya. And as I said before, the paradoxical question is, how come that Morocco is semi-arid or arid, half of it? Because most people go to northern Morocco. They don't go to the Sahara sometimes, they don't have the chance to. So they believe that Morocco is all green from the Mediterranean down to Dakhla in the south. And in fact, I said, and then I talked about the water policy, and they were very happy to really listen to what I had to present about Morocco, and spoke about water is essential for life, and how Kenya, Kenya needs to, well, at least, of course there are dams in Kenya too, some needs to actually sort of look around, look at our experience of others, and see how we can fix this problem of water. And of course, and now I'm receiving the governors of Mount Kenya starting from next week, and I call this regional diplomacy, which means that and we are thinking of establishing partnership between the region of Mount Kenya, counties around Mount Kenya, there are 10 of them I think, with regions, because we call them regions in Morocco, around the Mount Atlas, which might be 3 or 4 regions, so they can work directly, right? And they can work directly in the sense that they can have exchange programs in all fields, scholarships, exchange of talents, engineers, and here agriculture is 1. 2, the most important thing is that I forgot to speak about agriculture when we look at it from the perspective of 2 countries, Kenya and Morocco. I forgot to mention that actually you have agriculture, great potential. It's great, it's green, everybody's really, agriculture is part of your identity, but you don't have fertilizers. So Morocco, we have fertilizers. Actually, OCP, as it is called, is the largest producer of phosphate in the world. So they are here already. They started actually coming here. And in the region, the OCP has a $3 billion plant, so which is great. Really, you can see how they can serve the whole region. And they have like higher trading opportunities with Tanzania. And of course, I'm not going to speak about West Africa, where they are really established there. But my visit to Meru, I thought of the OCP, and I want to really engage them. And the governors were very happy to actually engage them. And we're going to start talking about that and how we can bring the OCP in terms of fertilizers to help.
Okay. Now, I'm going to shift a little bit from the region to the continent. A discussion about the Organization of African Unity. When it was formed, the main agenda was to fight for apartheid and then to do away with the imperialistic pre-colonial era. And now the post-colonial era, we had AU now. AU is now having the Agenda 2063, and they're trying to refocus the continent's agenda then, fighting for apartheid, to a more development inclusive continent, a more integrated continent. Do you think over the years, now almost 50 years down the line, in fact more than 50 years for some countries, the continent has achieved its independence dream?
I think to some extent, yes. There are things that we were able to solve. There were things that we are still unable to deal with. But at least we are aware of the challenges. I'm glad that you asked the questions because now I can answer it fully in the sense that Morocco reintegrated the African Union in 2017.
Yes.
Right? And that gave, according to many experts, that would really sort of boost the African Union because there was a big absence, and this is also part of our new foreign policy vision. And your question, I mean, like sometimes people just sort of when they think about Africa, they want to just rush and do this, but they forget that our history is really deep. Most people don't, and I think this generation now, young people, knowing that Africa is, its majority is young, a young continent, they keep telling us that, but they shouldn't forget that old traditions of Africa and all traditions which were confronted, clashed with foreign civilizations, if we can call them civilization in that particular context. Slavery and colonialism, they are not easy to deal with. I mean, I used to teach part of my academic activities in the US. When I was at Yale, that was actually one of my specialties that I would sort of focus, that I would focus on. Because without knowing your history, you can't go anywhere. There is this, of course, this American approach of saying it doesn't matter where you come from, what matters is where you are going. But for us, it's difficult to, at least for the sake of understanding why we're lagging behind so many things. I mean, when you have 3 centuries of trouble, slavery, and then colonialism, that completely destroyed you. You can imagine just that this, now we take identity for granted. You can say, you are Kenyan, I am Moroccan, right? But both our countries were colonized. At a certain time, even this term, Kenyan, Moroccan, they were not seen as identities of religious, cultural, linguistic. They were seen as geographies, as serving the mother country, whether in the sense of Spain and Morocco and France, or in the sense of Kenya, it's Britain. So now, of course, this identity is going to last sometimes because we were uprooted. Our ancestors were completely repressed. They could not speak the language. You could not go to books by Ngugi and you'll see many other African writers like Achebe and so forth, and you see how we need to think deeply about that and say how we recovered with the independence in the 1960s. And we recovered our identity first. We have to give it some substance. So it's going to take some time. It is going to be a sentiment, of course. Nationalism, nation. Building the state, you need first to justify why your state is different from what used to be as a colony. So the move from the colony to the state is a big step forward. After that, of course, we are not going to be stuck in this discourse, of course, sentimental discourse.
We've moved from the colony to the state, and the issues were that some countries were to fight poverty, ignorance.
Yeah, because our structures, traditional structures, were destroyed, and those that were replaced by, those structures were used to serve the colonizer, not the colonized. So, do you know, structure takes time in order to be established. So it might take 20, 30, 50, I mean, we are not all there. And there is this, that. And there is still, I mean, like, we're lying if we say that we're completely independent. We had the political independence, if I may use the term, but not so the economic independence. We still touch to our metropolitan centers in Europe, or now add to it the US if you want. And there is still, in some generations, especially those who don't read their history, it's a little bit difficult for them. They still have this colonial complex, you know? I mean, we have to dress
I believe most countries.
Yes, absolutely. And I go back to Ngugi because...
Would you say there's still neo-colonialism in the continent? Because
yes, absolutely.
I see most of these
absolutely. I mean, go to countries which don't function well and you'll see all the companies that are not African, exploring gold, exploring everything. Where does that come from? And some of them even want Africa to stay the way it is, completely chaos. So they can create a state by default. You know, I mean, we should not be that naive. There are union or unified, strong, prosperous Africa does not suit everybody. And now, so of course, African Union was a forum, and it is still a forum that is dealing with serious challenges. All things that we can talk about development, of course, there are serious challenges to African Union. African Union is a beautiful forum. They are talking about a lot of issues, And there is always the problem of implementation. All of us, we are excellent orators when it comes to identifying, diagnosing our problem. But when do we act upon that? That's a serious challenge. Africa, there are still civil wars in some parts of Africa. There is still a border issue. Sometimes our borders between an African and other African countries are much more problematic than the borders with Europe or with the US.
Do we have to blame the colonialists for this?
We cannot blame. This is a shared responsibility. I don't blame anyone, but this is a shared responsibility. I don't give myself the right. I'm in criticism. When you criticize the former colonizer, it does not mean that you're really redeeming yourself. It means that there is a certain part of history that you need to be aware of. But self or criticism is crucial for our development. We need to pause and say what we are doing wrong. Our institutions, democratic institutions, need to be powerful. We can no longer say, well, Africa used to be this or that. You know, that's a bygone period. You can't go back to pre-colonial times, even if you want. There are some intellectuals saying you can't go home again. Once you leave home, you live it, you change, transformed completely. We have a problem of our young generations, and there is unemployment among them. Up to 50% of the young people below 25 of age are unemployed. We have, as you know, the crisis of the 21st century, which is migration. Our people are leaving the continent, and sometimes that's the easiest way for them to become illegal migrants or refugees and at least sort of manage to save their lives. We have, of course, poverty, and worse is the climate change, you know, desertification, floods, and everything that are really affecting the countries. So the African Union needs to have this as a priority. They cannot continue to invest in different ideologies like creating blocs within the African Union itself. Sometimes we say Francophone bloc, Anglophone bloc, especially when it comes to the question of elections. And we need to empower the states. What do I mean by that? Because Morocco is also concerned by this point. Empower the states, meaning there is sometimes security and peace and security. And there is a commission of the African Union called Peace and Security, right? And Morocco is a member, became a member recently. And one of our issues is that this stability and security are essential for the prosperity and the sustainable development of Africa. There are still certain countries that really interfere with other countries. So we have to really look at regions, or this concept that is used by Harvard professors sometimes called neighborliness. In French it's voisinage. We need to really work together as regions, as neighborhoods, not interfering and trying to manipulate or create problems to each other. So, and of course, I say this again and again, we need to invest in education. Yes. We cannot invest in easy things. We spoke about agriculture. Of course, there is also the importance of the industrialization, but we need to form our people. We cannot only rely on ancient ways to ensure the living of our youth. And here, education and the kind of professional training we should provide should be adapted to African needs.
Now, you just said you're a member of the Peace Committee within the African Union as Morocco. Of course, you may be aware about some of the borderline issues that we have in the continent and the maritime conflicts that we have. We have the Ilemi Triangle, we have the Somali-Kenya maritime dispute, we have the Migingo dispute. In your own country, there's the Western Sahara. Now, how then do these ones will affect nationalism, of course. How then do we as a continent advocate and address some of these issues?
Yes, that's an important point.
And more specifically about Western Sahara.
That's in the same context. Natural resources. I mean, I sometimes hate this word because this is a word that is really problematic. Yes. Why our perfect or our best natural resource is the human mind, is the skills, talents of the people, is the human resource. I love this term, human resource. I mean, if you compare, look at Japan with Mickey Mouse, it sells more than what other countries sell in gas and oil. So sometimes we say it's a blessing that Morocco doesn't have any natural resources except the phosphate. but compared to
They say
many Arab countries.
oil curse.
Yes, absolutely. So we don't have, and Kenya is the same. That's also what the kind of, yes, you have some, you discovered some oil recently, but it's still, Kenya and Morocco are about agriculture, about other fields, not about use just this kind of rent economy of natural resources. Two, there are sometimes people who put like this bad ideas in certain ethnic regions. You just say, well, they have gold, or they have silver, or they have copper, or they have oil, or they have gas. This is enough for itself to actually break away from the state and then create something independent. This is a serious problem. I can tell you that 22 African countries are concerned with separatism. 22 are really, I mean, where separatism creates a threat. If you find oil in a certain tribe, you just have to see itself or exert or assert itself as an ethnic, different religious identity, and there you are. Okay, we have this problem because this is a false propaganda. We have the problem of the Sahara, of course. So, and some of...
Which hasn't been addressed almost 50 years later.
Yes, addressed, not addressed. I mean, there are two sides to it. I will start with the side of ideology, or the side of, because it's puzzling, actually the puzzling question, and it's a puzzling, I mean, you don't know exactly, I mean, it was born in this kind of Cold War, where it was a question of a political system trying to undermine another political system and using anything that you can find in the way. And geography here, Sahara was the point at that time with Algeria and Morocco, a different system. One was supposed to be capitalist, the other one was supposed to be communist, pro-Soviet. So most of the countries at that time were trying to, this is a way actually to undermine the monarchy in Morocco and the stability of the country. Fine, but how, why did it last? It lasted, one of them, like I don't know which side to start from. There are two realities. There is a reality on the ground. There is a reality outside of Morocco when the Sahara, the Moroccan Sahara, is discussed in international forums or institutions, including the UN and the African Union, right? There, of course, I mean, if you go to the ground, I mean, I really want to, you are a journalist, and I think media helps us a lot because these are the people who are going to give us deep knowledge about each other's and raise our consciousness and sort of guide us towards things that we don't know. The reality on the ground, if you go to Morocco, and I want you to go, and actually there are a lot of people who went, even from their ministries, there are journalists who went there are big events like Crans Montana, they go there. The reality on the ground, there is absolutely no conflict and no problem. So why is that? Because the local population, up to 90%, they participate in the local and the local elections, the regional elections, and the legislative, the parliament elections. So, and what does that mean? Because some people say, oh, we need a referendum, we need this, we need that, but that's a referendum in itself when you have the people. One, two, some, unfortunately, even some of the Kenyan advisors I heard before, I don't need to mention names, they referred sometimes to Morocco as a colony, which is completely nonsense. And you just have to read, again, Kenyan writers about colonialism. The colony doesn't leave behind anything. The colony, whatever it grows, whatever it does, it's to serve what we call the mother country. If you go to the Sahara, the Moroccan Sahara, you would not find a problem at all. Every 10 shillings, dirham, which is 10 shillings, earned in the Sahara, the government adds 7 times that, like invests 7 times. 10 shillings becomes 70 throughout the cities. When you go, or if you go, there are cities completely like they were shanty towns during the colonial times, the Spanish period. And now they are prospering, they are becoming hubs, really, and this is the reality on the ground. And there is a joke, I mean, I asked one of my friends here in the civil society organizations, who I said, did you go to the Sahara? He said, I didn't. He said, I just went to Dakhla, which is the southern, which is the farthest city in the south of the Sahara. He says, no, I didn't go to the Sahara. Why did he? I said, and he says, Dakhla. I said, Dakhla is a city in the Sahara. How come that you missed it? He says, really? Because he expected what is being conveyed outside, this kind of propaganda that he's going to find bullets, wars, and everything. Right. So the problem lies in these camps in the southern Algeria called the Tindouf camps, where about 29,000 refugees, so-called refugees, are kept there, right? And all we're asking, because I was actually a member of I was representing Moroccan Parliament at the Council of Europe in the committee of asylum and migration and refugees. So all we're asking, this kind of what was so-called camps, 29,000, that's where the problem is, or people who want to sort of exploit that kind of problem. We want them first. We just ask the international community to actually give us the number of those so-called refugees. We have to identify them. This is according to UNHCR. Like, in order to have the status of refugee, you need to have a census, give them the liberty of movement and freedom of speech. These are the things that they don't have. You can go to Morocco. Sometimes you can fall on a separatist. You know, separatism is sometimes in all countries. You know, they move, they have Moroccan passports, they have everything, they have all the benefits, but we don't repress them, we don't imprison them. But which is not the case of international organizations. Sometimes they cannot go to these camps. And Morocco is doing everything to just have these three things, and you'll see, and I guarantee you that nobody is going to stay in those camps. They all go back to Morocco.
No.
So, yeah, and now on top of that, I have to add that nonetheless, Morocco, in good faith, to actually sort of coordinate with its African and international partners, had this plan called the autonomy within the sovereignty of Morocco, right? We have two regions now in the Sahara, in the Moroccan Sahara, and they are closer to this autonomy thing. But the autonomy is a plan that is still open to negotiation, and this is within Moroccan sovereignty. And the UN Security Council described this autonomy plan as serious, credible, and realistic. So, and I really want, sometimes I ask my Kenyan colleagues, especially in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to really sort of look into this autonomy plan, and I'm sure that they are going to support us in the end. And also, at least, we support Morocco. We expect that Kenya to support Morocco in finding a peaceful and political solution to the Sahara conflict.
That also includes other interstate conflicts that are in the region.
Yeah, there are many of them, but this one seems to be lasting, because when you have neighboring countries investing in a conflict, then it's not something, I mean, even if the military regimes that created the problems, they've been falling, and now they are still like on the verge of...
Say that the emergence of this is about wealth that is being found at some of these borders.
No, there is absolutely no, as I told you, this wealth is just a myth, and sometimes even this separatist propaganda tells you this is how they can convince you, and I think every country is going to be threatened if you have that kind of discourse. They say, well, you are in the Sahara, try to imagine that you're independent, that you are different from Morocco, right? But differences you will never find them. If when you go to the Sahara, you'll see the same culture, the same religion, the same language. So you don't know exactly on which base do you need to create another so-called state independent. This is just a political maneuvering that happened before, and we're stuck with it. So they will tell you, well, you don't need to work. This is again like as if Africans, this is going back to the colonial discourse of the lazy native, you know, Africans don't work. This is going back even to colonial times. I mean, this Polisario thing, its references are purely colonial, right? And they actually promote this false discourse. You know, if you get this independence or whatever in their imagination, you don't need to work, you'll have $500 to $1,000 a month. You see how they are tempting people based on false discourses. The richness of Morocco, including the Sahara, is its people, is their talents, is their work together, is their unity and their stability.
Now, we've talked about an Africa that is rising, and a continent that has just transitioned from the pre-colonial period to the state, now independent autonomous states. Now, briefly answer these three areas. How can Africa harness its human capital and natural resources? Because we are known to be wealthy as a continent, but on the other side, we are not able maybe to stand on our own feet?
Oh, this is very simple. According to me, what I think is, instead of investing in our pits and wells and what we call this natural capital, we should invest in our people, especially in our youth. We should invest in our education. This should be a must, and the budget, our national budget, should really give a lot of, because as His Majesty King Mohammed VI said, in order for the African Union to be successful institutions and to represent fairly the continent, we need to put the African citizen and his interests or her interests at the center of any African policy. We need to invest in our people. Under the modern standards, we had a beautiful, amazing cultural heritage, storytellers, and you could read novels, you could see films. Now times have changing. Now there is what we call, our national citizens should be qualified to be or become a global citizen. We need to empower the institutions, especially social institutions dealing with this. We have in Morocco what we call the National Initiative for Human Development. Human is very important here, because sometimes our people lie outside of the institutions. We have a national strategy for sustainable development. We need to, as you said before, the term you used, which is we need to have integrated regions, to a point like we need to talk about integrated continental, we need to have an integrated continent at all levels. Two, I'm thinking, when I think we have a problem of migration, of course. Migration is a big problem. Why people are migrating, as I said before, from Europe, from Africa. We need to address that. We cannot rely on
South Africa being a promising economy, and yet it's the largest in terms of immigrants into some of these countries in the West.
Yeah, sometimes it's a culture. Sometimes it has nothing to do with where you are. Well, I mean, I know people, because recently, I don't know if you've heard about like how Morocco legalized the status of 50,000 migrants, illegal migrants, and refugees. Because we used to be a country of transit to Europe, and now we're a country of destination. So I heard stories. Sometimes you find a professor, even a doctor, trying to migrate. Because we watch films, we have this mythical conception of Europe, that this is paradise, and we wanted the easy way. But of course, there is a tragedy. The Mediterranean now is becoming some sort of a grave for many of our youth, and we should be extremely concerned. But I go back to my point. Maybe, I don't know if you are going to ask me about migration. It's very important. I mean, like, the paradox here is that we have our youth, which is the backbone of our economy. I mean, you can't talk about agriculture if most of our young people are abroad, and they are even going to find decent jobs. So a part of why our economies are not working, because our youth is depleting. We have the majority, of course, in terms of demography, but the most dynamic of them, sometimes they prefer to migrate. Two, you have sometimes what we call this international humanitarian aid. I mean, as I was serving the Council of Europe on this particular committee, I used to say that this humanitarian aid is a painkiller. We need to cure the problem at its root. What does it mean? Instead of this humanitarian aid, we can imagine, or we can plan to have a development, economic and social development, investment project in Africa itself. And I will assure you that migration would completely decrease, and nobody, once they find a decent thing, that would create another mood, even if now the mood now it starts as poverty.
Do you think it has worked in South Sudan?
Sorry?
Do you think it has worked in a country like South Sudan? Because they've been pumping so much aid there, but the conflict is still going on.
No, humanitarian aid never works. It's just like it delays the problem. That's it, but it does not solve it. As I said, it's a painkiller.
Okay, let's move quickly to the last three questions, which you'll maybe answer briefly. How would you compare the tourism industry in your country, Morocco, and the one in Kenya? And what has your government taken to stabilize maybe the sector in your country?
Yes, actually, tourism between Morocco and Kenya, this is also a field where I plan to, when I started already talking about it, where I plan to have some sort of partnership between the two countries. you have products that we don't have. We don't have wildlife. We have different things. But nonetheless, we want to attract foreigners. That's what tourism is about. So Kenya has more challenges than Morocco, geographically speaking, because sometimes you need to be surrounded by rich countries, stable countries, in order to attract tourists. You know, to be close, the proximity helps. Geography in Morocco is very helpful, where tourism can be routine. You drive down to Tangiers, to southern Spain, and then you cross the ferry in about half hour. And then you take now we have the fastest train in Africa. I don't know if you heard about it.
Yes, yeah.
So you can take it and then you're in Casablanca and Marrakesh.
Yeah.
So this is one. Proximity is very helpful to us. We're blessed. We thank Allah for that. And sometimes there are a lot of things in Morocco. They're centered around tourism. I mean, we have to fix our villages, the urban planning, make them beautiful, wide streets. When you go to the city of Marrakesh, you'll be impressed how it's really attractive. Even from Moroccans, they don't recognize themselves when they are there. So it's beautiful. Two, we have a diversified product. What does it mean? We have the coast, which is large Mediterranean and nice beaches on both Mediterranean and the Atlantic. A big hotel industry that accompanies that. And then we have the desert, the famous desert, so you can go on a different view, and then we have the scenery in the Atlas Mountains where it snows, we have 4 seasons. And then we have the most important thing to me, which is cultural heritage. Really, if you go to the city of Fez, there is a soul in it. It's old, ancient, as they call it, the Medina, but it has a soul that is still alive. And I went to Lamu. Unfortunately, I said this is exactly looks like Fez, but I don't hear the sounds of the artisans work on the trays or pots and so forth. So I said, if I have the chance to really sort of do something, we want to really sort of bring that spirit, reviving that cultural heritage, and put it in Lamu and all those villages around, in terms of corniche, in terms of landscape and so forth.
Do you think the Lamu heritage is it disappearing from your perspective?
I compare. You know, diplomats compare a lot. I don't know what the comparison is good or not. It is not as it should be, because I know all our histories are rich. Kenya, as His Excellency the President says, what's distinguishable about it, it kept its heritage. You find in it everything. Swahili as a language is the symbol of this kind of cultural diversity. And I think conservation is a big term, even at the UN now. They talk a lot about conservation. If you have a monument, a mosque, a church that is old, you should really sort of renovate it and create. You have to be creative in tourism. You have to create the interest for other people to come and see you. You cannot just rely on natural landscapes and that's it. You have to make it more. And 3, what I noticed also, infrastructure. Road infrastructure is really very, very important. You know, imagine a young people coming to Kenya. They would love to be in Nairobi and then rent a car and then drive to Kisumu or drive to Naivasha. This is the kind of routine that I think would be very helpful if you turn it to Korea. 3, Morocco has more than 10 international airports. So you can just go to different parts of the country without having to go through Ohab, which is Casablanca or Rabat. And this together now, if you go also, of course, stability, council, especially in Africa, if you go to risk map, Morocco is always considered or evaluated as safe as Europe. So you can, that works a lot, especially on our region when they link us to the Middle East and North Africa. And this together, actually, we reach now 12.5 million tourists every year.
Okay.
So, but still we are not satisfied. We want to increase the number up to 20 million. Yeah.
Okay. Now, do you agree with President Kagame that Africa needs to industrialize to maybe stand on its feet and we avoid the foreign debt that is highly burdening the continent?
Yeah, African industrialization will give us economy, will give us independence, economic independence. This is true, but we cannot reduce the independence or our autonomy or whatever we want to call it to one field. I mean, when you talk about industrialization, I'd rather like I like actually the industrialization is important, of course, because the president may think of the field which keeps us attached to foreign powers or foreign nations is industrialization. We need to export everything. But the problem is that we export even food, you know?
Which we produce here.
No, sorry, we export. No, we import even food, you know, food processing. Yes, and you can go to two rivers and you'll see a lot of food. And Kenya is really a model. But if you go to certain African countries, you'll be surprised. Even yogurt and those things are imported. So this is where you really sort of beat yourself and say, why? Africa, on one side, on the one hand, it's described always as the future of humanity, of fertile land, 70% of fertile land there, which is not used, and so forth, natural resources, all of it. And on the other hand, there's a problem of insecurity. So, I think there should be a balance. I mean, when we speak about industrialization in Morocco, not at the expense of agricultural. And our neighboring countries back in the 70s, they were thinking just about industrialization. You know, this is kind of the socialist policy or politics saying industrialization is even agriculture can be turned into industrialization.
Yeah, agro-processing.
So, yes, absolutely. Of course, in Morocco now, again, I go back to things, it's really one of the leading manufacturing of cars in Africa. Like we have Renault in Tangiers, we have Peugeot in the city near Rabat, and industrialization, we have food processing industrialization lab designed for exportation. And there's also the digital economy, which is becoming also something very unique. Morocco is becoming some sort of a Silicon Valley in the region, which is also something to add. And there is the hotel industrialization. There is also industrialization construction and aeronautics. We have a lot of institutes actually that are really sort of working on that in research scientific places. And of course there is this, and there is the infrastructure that goes beyond it. I mean, industrialization, but since exportation is really one of its components, we created structures. Like, you know, if you happen to read the Standard or the Daily Nation in the month of July this year, you'll see that there were throughout the month of July. There were 3 or 4 big pieces on Morocco's economic achievements or industrialization achievements, and they spoke about the biggest port in the Mediterranean in Africa is Tangimed, again, and the fastest train, and we have a lot of trains. There is these things that also help with industrialization of Morocco, and now our policy is to increase like the people who benefit from industrialization. Now it's around 15, and we want to increase it in 2-3 years to 24-25%.
Okay. Finally, do you speak any local language? Swahili? I would ask, how important is this for an ambassador like yourself?
Yes, this is something, I mean, like, I wish I could speak Swahili and even Kikuyu that I heard before, because it's in the neighborhood. But unfortunately, I mean, I'm trying to at least start with Swahili, because it's very important. I mean, the only tempting thing is that when you are in Kenya, everybody speaks English. I mean, you know, that's something that does not really sort of make us, you know, rush to learn the national language. But Swahili does not look very foreign to me, which sometimes we find ourselves there too. It's a part of identity. When you speak about Arabic, Arabic is the national language, the official language in Morocco, and there's also Berber. And
most of North Africa.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And then so when you see a lot of words, when you say about even when you talk about Uhuru, I mean, I heard this in Amy Césaire before, like in a book Uhuru, which is freedom, yes, which comes from the word Arabic Hurriya, and Safar is Safar. There are so many things which it makes up for us, especially the ambassadors from the Arab world, easier for us to learn the language. But your point, definitely. I mean, you can't. I think it's no longer valid to just send an ambassador because thinking about his or her career in his own country without taking into account how he or she fits in the culture where he's going. So I've read a lot about Kenya, and I think diplomacy is special knowledge, special, not meaning like elitist or something. I'm just saying. Diplomacy is a form of knowledge in the sense that the requirement is you need to know where you are. Culturally, historically, geographically, all those things. And eventually to be able to really persuade and negotiate and strengthen the relationship between the countries you came from, you represent the countries where you live.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your time. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you.